All right, welcome back. Intro to Technology 1023. We're going to be going over HTML today. So this is a relatively large topic. I'm going to go over some of the primary tags that you're going to end up using and some of the primary concepts. So the lecture itself is going to be relatively short. We will have a exercise portion with this, but the topic itself, I do not have time to go over absolutely every single tag and every single scenario that there is regarding HTML. Okay, so I'm going to go over some of the primary concepts so you can extrapolate on them, so you can actually solve a lot of the problems that you're going to have if you're going to go in this web development direction, so you can actually solve these problems yourself. Okay, so first thing I have to bring up is that HTML is not a programming language. It is not a programming language. It is called a markup language. And what this does is provides structure for your website. So basically, a lot of people consider it the skeleton of your website or your web page. Okay. I already ranted about this a little bit. So one of the things I do need to point out right off the top is that the web, traditionally speaking, there are concepts out there that are emerging that don't go with this theory here. But for the most part, what we're going to end up practicing is a concept called separation of concerns. And what this means is that your structure, everything structure oriented, should be in your HTML and HTML file. Everything that is styles oriented should be in the CSS file. And in this course, we're not covering JavaScript at all for interactivity, but anything that is programming oriented, logic oriented is going to be in your JavaScript file or files, depending on how big of a website that you got. So yeah, this is what we're going to have to go down. And I have to bring this up because every single semester, what people end up doing, what students end up doing is that they don't understand a problem. They end up Googling it. Stack Overflow comes up first, and then they just copy and paste. And that may or may not work. If it does work, more than likely, what's going to end up happening is that there's going to be a lot of bad practices built in there. One of the common ones is, well, I was trying to demonstrate this thing on Stack Overflow. I was limited in my resources, so I put absolutely everything in the HTML, which is not good at all. Doesn't scale. It's not even good for logic. Okay. There are a few arguments out there in terms of speed, but not very good ones. So yeah, make sure you're separating out your structure in your HTML file, your styles in your CSS file. And if you end up doing JavaScript in this course, I'm not covering it, but you might do that for yourself. Then all your logic goes in the JavaScript file. Okay, so here's a little small example. What I want to call out here is the Doctype up top, excuse me. And what this does is tell the browser which version of HTML you're going to use. Now, HTML5 has been out for a long time, and it's the standard. Okay, so some of your legacy websites will use HTML4. We're not going to be using HTML4. I'll tell you about it like I am right now, but unless you run into it out in the work environment, HTML4, we're not covering it. Okay. So HTML tag, which is just under Doctype, that is your root tag. Everything has to go inside of this HTML tag. Okay. Body is the tag that starts all the visible content for your website. Okay. Simple enough. A div is called a page division. That's all it does. It divides a page up. This allows you to control where that little container goes. And I'm going to start referring to it as container divs, because that's exactly how they operate. This little container div allows you to control everything that's inside of it as a modular group. All right. H1 stands for header 1. We'll get into a little bit more details here in a second. Another div, which you can put text in, you can put content in it, but that's going to be a page division for just text. Okay. And then span's a little bit different from div. Again, we'll get into the differences here in just a second. And then I also want to call out the image tag down there with the source attribute. Again, we'll get into attributes as well. This is just starting out. And this is how this little structure looks like. So try to keep this in your head real quick, and then I'm going to show you the outcome of that. So this is the H1, this is the div text, all your spans line up. I'll explain why that is happening here in a second. And there is the image, okay? So all this work that was right here produced this, all right? So relatively simple example, but it does highlight a few things I want to go through in this presentation. First of which, walking through what I just did there, it was called the DOM. So the DOM stands for Document Object Model. It also goes by a couple other names as nested string array or jagged array. I hear jagged array quite a bit more often. The reason why this is because the way the DOM is actually stored in memory is a string array. That's all it is, okay? So understanding the DOM structure is critical to transversing it. So if you look at the picture off to the right here, let's go with this sub-nav that's down here. I'm not going to talk about event propagation in this course. I will in the Intro to Web course, but if you needed to traverse the DOM, you would have to go starting at the subnav, the nav content, the navigation header, body, and then HTML. That's the path that the propagation will take. I'm not going to talk about that anymore just because it's not part of the curriculum. So there are two propagation types. There's the bubble and then there's the capture. Bubble starts at the place that it was clicked from, so bubbling up. Capture is the exact opposite, where you go down the DOM. Okay, that's all I'm going to say on that. Block level elements. Okay, so a block level element is a div. Now there's a bunch of them. I have it highlighted in orange down here. Again, this is another reason why I'm not going through every single tag, because there's too many of them. A block level element always starts on a new line. And the way that the browser does this is an old tag from a long time ago called BR, break. Div has a break at the beginning of the div and a break at the end of the div. That creates the new line effect. So no matter what you do, unless you're setting the width manually, that's going to start on a new line, okay? I also want to call your attention to the docs over here, W3 School, HTML blocks. That's going to give you this page. W3 Schools in general, if you're doing HTML and CSS, is really, really good for documentation. JavaScript is still helpful as well. If you want to click on that button up there, obviously this is a picture, but once you're actually on the website, that'll work. But yeah, for HTML and CSS in particular, very, very good. There are lots of resources for JavaScript. JavaScript, in terms of a community, is absolutely massive. Yeah, then these other things are useful on occasion. So span elements, inline elements are what they're called. Very, very similar to a div if you're talking about a span, except for it doesn't have those break tags. So it's inline and it has its own width, and the width is set by the content. So that's the only real difference there. And those are the primary element types. There's a block and then there's an inline. That's all you got to remember. Inline is, well, stays on the line, and then a block element is a new line. Attributes. So this concept is very important, and a lot of people, particularly students, have a hard time understanding why this is here. I do think it's because a lot of students are coming from the high school environment where everything was a procedure. So they're just relying on those skills where they're trying to make everything a procedure. And as you can see from the little subsections here on just the HTML alone, good luck making all that a procedure. You cannot make these a procedure. You have to understand the concepts. And that's why we're starting from a really low resolution and working our way down into a little bit higher resolution understandings of these concepts. So attributes is one of the primary concepts that you need to understand. An attribute is there so you can communicate between the HTML and the CSS, and the JavaScript. CSS and JavaScript will request something from the DOM. To do that effectively, you need to do that through attributes and not tags. All right. This example here with W3C is with an image tag with source. Okay. That makes sense. You're going to be using class and ID probably the most. And then if you take Intro to Web with me, you'll end up using custom attributes quite a lot for your web component. So yeah, the key takeaway here is that attributes allow the CSS and the JavaScript to communicate with the DOM efficiently. Okay. HTML tag defines the root of the document. I already said that earlier. The link is up there if you want more information from the docs. Div. It's going to start everything on a new line. Stands for page division. Span, I already talked about this. Inline container, highlighted in orange. H1 through H6, these are header tags. I do have to call out right now that if you end up using header tags to stylize your font, you will most certainly lose points for that because that is a accessibility problem. These header tags, what they're doing in the background is allowing screen readers to properly nest conceptual components in terms of the content on the page relative to the user and relative to the page. What this means is that your H1 tag should be content header, H2 should be a subheader, H3 should be a subheader of H2, and then your screen reader will read it in order, properly nested. So yeah, keep that in mind. For some reason, people don't understand that. My first job, my boss didn't know that. And I don't know why. It's baffling to this day why that was a problem. But yeah, keep that in mind. Definitely something you need to be aware of. H1 through H6 are your header tags, and you use them primarily for accessibility and so SEO, which again, we're not getting into this course with. A tag, action tag, anchor tag, depends on who you're talking to. Okay. What this does is provides a link. So what this is going to show up as is W3C, a tag doc. Okay. And then the link itself is the anchor tag. Canvas. Okay, so Canvas is a HTML tag that allows JavaScript to manipulate graphical data within its boundaries. I don't know what else to say here. You're not going to use this until you start getting into graphics. So that's not going to be something we're covering in this course, but you will run into it. I've had to run into it. I've done cropping applications with Canvas, image manipulation things with Canvas where you're moving your profile picture around and that type of thing. So yeah, Canvas is there for drawing graphics, and you're not going to be using it for this course unless you're overly ambitious. And we'll cover it more in Intro to Web and some of the more advanced web courses that we have here at Alfred State. Table. So table, I have to bring this up because it keeps showing up in people's work because, again, Stack Overflow, they copy paste and it works, so they turn it in. This is a very old way of handling the layout problem. So before smartphones, so before really 2007, when iPhone came out. Before that, the web was 16 by 9 or 4 by 3 for aspect ratios on the monitors. So the aspect ratio didn't really change. You only had 2, and that's all you had to account for. And it was relatively easy to do. So the way people handled that was tables. which makes sense. You make a bunch of logical chunks of things and you put stuff in it, and the layout never changes because the device never changes. So, yay, it works. Um, this is not how we handle this problem anymore, and it's very, very inefficient. We handle this problem, and we'll get into it with the CSS section of this course with Flexbox or CSS Grid. And that's how you handle that problem of mobile responsiveness, is what we call it. So the reason why I have this here is that if you turn in a table, you will know about it because I'm going to say something, and then I'm going to ask you why you didn't use CSS Grid or Flexbox. Literally going to be that simple. So don't use a table unless you absolutely have to, and you just have a fantastic reason for why you need a table. Okay, title tag allows you to change the little tab that you're located on and what that actually says. Form. If you're taking web courses here, we spend a lot of our time doing Ajax and progressive web apps and web components, where we're not going to do full-on page request, but it is a thing that a lot of people do, and there is a place for it. Blogs come to mind where page request, just do the page request, it'll be fine. But a form tag, this gives you some opportunity to use some behind-the-scenes JavaScript without actually having to do it yourself. So form tag with a couple attributes called action and method gets you most of the way there to do a full page request. Okay. Again, because we don't have a server for this course and we're not passing any data to a server, you're not going to have to worry about this. But again, like everything else, you need to know that it exists. So when you do need it, you can go look it up. And that is the end of the HTML section. Relatively quick. We're going to have a practice demonstration here right after this video. So with that said, I'll see you in the demonstration. Don't worry about too much if you didn't remember what everything did. I'm going to walk through what exactly we're trying to do with the HTML and CSS section. So again, you're going to get an opportunity to understand this and do it yourself with guidance. And then for your project, you'll end up doing that as well, and you'll have 3 to 4 weeks to do that. So with that said, I'll see you in the demonstration. Okay, welcome back. We're going to go over the HTML little example here. And the first thing that you probably should do, if you don't have one already, is download an IDE. I like Visual Code here. If you want to follow along with me with the same software, you can go ahead and do so. So if you don't have this IDE installed yet, you can open up your browser of choice. Most of you are going to be on Chrome. In your little search bar there, Visual Code should come up with this download button right here. And then if you're on Windows, obviously click this Windows button. If you are in the Linux environment, don't download anything. You can download this Debian file, but then you'd have to install it through the command line or through applications there. And then Mac as well. If you are in the Linux environment, what I would do is use Snap. So if you don't have Snap already installed, apt install Snap, sudo apt install Snap, and then it'd be sudo snap install Visual Code -- or -- classic to install Visual Code through Snap. So with that said, obviously I already have this installed, so there is that. I'm going to close this. If you guys want to follow along exactly with me, you're going to need one more thing once you have Visual Code. So over here is a little extensions thing. So if we click on this, it's going to open up a few options here, but what you really want is this up here, this little search bar, and then you're going to want live server. So we could do this through the file directly, but for the most part, this is better in just about every single way. So I have this one down here, or this first one installed right here. which is a live server. Okay. Obviously, I already have it installed, but if you click this button, this will say install for you. All right, and that shouldn't take very long to install. And then you know that is working once you have a go live down here in the bottom right-hand corner. All right. All right, so with that, file management, you can put this anywhere you want. I have a little start folder here just because it's how I typically do things at Alfred. We have a starting scenario, but because it's HTML, literally have nothing. So I have my folder up and running here. Go ahead and do whatever makes sense for you, however you're taking notes or however you're following along. But the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new file. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to use this icon. It says new file. And then I'm going to call this index.html. If I can type. There we go. And the reason why we need to get used to calling this file index, the first file for the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS for that matter, but it's really important for the HTML is because a lot of your web servers search for index. Some of them search for app. I know Node does that if you have the settings for it, but most of your web servers are going to search for index. Okay. So up to this point, we're good. Now, before we even get too far into this, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut to move this window off to the left. It's Windows left key or left arrow. And then I'm going to hit this go live button. Okay. I'm going to allow this through the firewall. I'm going to open this up into its own window, and then I'm going to minimize that. I'm going to put this off to the right. And now we have our little setup here. Okay. First thing that we're going to do, first thing that we need to tell the browser is how are we going to render this HTML? And as I said during the lecture, there's multiple versions of it. However, we're going to use HTML5. Okay, so it's going to be the exclamation point, Doctype, HTML, and then you're going to close off that tag. I'm going to close this file explorer because we're not going to be doing anything with other files, so we're good for now. I need that extra space. All right, next, what we're going to do is that root tag, which happens to be HTML, and this is where everything is going to be appended to. All right. Now, one of the things that I didn't do in the lecture, in the examples that were in the lecture, is I didn't have a head tag. Head is not going to be part of the visible structure of your HTML or your markup code. This is metadata for the document itself. So this is you telling the browser, this is what this index file is all about. Okay. Now, I don't do metadata that often with HTML. So I always have to look this up, and there is no shame in doing so, right? Because most of your programming and web development career is going to be based on, I understand the concept, I just forgot something like syntax. One of the things that you need to get used to doing is finding the answer you are looking for. So I'm going to copy this real quick. Notice that I went to W3C, which is a authoritative source in terms of HTML stuff. And right here is your meta tags. Now, I'm not going to use all of these because I don't need them. I do need the metadata for the charset, so UTF-8. So this is going to be your encoding, how you're going to handle characters. All right. Description, keyword, and author. All things I don't care about. So I'm going to get rid of them. I would end up needing those for SEO purposes if you have a web scraper. So if you're using like an APA reference generator, it could very easily be looking for one of these meta tags for something like author. All right, so it could be helpful in the future. It's just not for us right now. Okay, so right here is our head tag. So this is a bunch of metadata about the document that we already have. And this is also where you could put JavaScript. You generally don't. There are scenarios where you should, but CSS would go here for stylized things. And then body is going to be the next tag that we're going to need. So notice that this is right under the head tag, and the body is going to be what you can start to see in your document. So we have body here, and just for the sake of demonstration, to make sure that everything is working, I'm going to have a div, and then I'm going to put this is working. And then I'm going to hit Control Save. Okay. One thing I'm noticing is that this is not showing up over here. So I'm going to refresh, see what happens. And okay, cool. That is working. Now, I should have been able to save that and that would have auto updated. So I'm going to do this a couple more times. Okay. And now it's working as intended. So we are at where I wanted to be. So I'm going to save that again. That's going to get rid of this is working. All right. Okay, so I want to demonstrate block tags, inline tags, and then I also want to throw an image in here. So it's going to be very similar to the lecture that we went over in the last video. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use an H1. All right, H1 here. Let's go Trek Bikes. American brand. Makes sense to me. Okay, Trek Bikes. All right. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an H2 here. H2. And we're going to go road bike. Oh. Here we go. Road bike. Now I'm already noticing that I want a little bit more structure. I want a little bit more control, at least for the future. I'm going to add a div container here. So whatever I put inside of road bike, this little section here, I can move as a entire unit. All right. And this is going to be more helpful for CSS. And just to get used to adding attributes, we're not going to use them initially, but just to get used to adding attributes, I'm going to add an ID of Trek road container, like this. I'm going to add a attribute up here, class header 1, and then down here, class of header 2. All right, so there is that. Now I need a little bit of content here, and I'm not going to go too crazy on this. Let's go ahead and pull up Trek. Okay, no, I'm just looking for road. Here we go. Oh, let's go performance road. Why not? Okay, so here we go. We got road bike, and then let's go in H3 here. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm going to go with Madone. Probably wrong. Header 3. Okay, and the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little container for this as well. Div. Okay, ID. Madone container. And what we'll end up doing is for the CSS portion of this course and curriculum, we'll end up using this same exact thing to stylize it a little bit more. So we'll need these attributes eventually. Okay, so div ID, Madone container, H3 for header 3. Okay, so we're doing pretty good here. Let's add at least, we'll add this picture. Why not? So I'm going to have to save this image as. I'm going to go to intro to web resources, intro, start, and we officially need a folder. And that's not going to work. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to add a folder, pictures. That's going to show up there. I'm going to save it here. Madone. Save. Okay, so if I take this one, I'm going to have to alter it. So I'll show you guys how to do that real quick. Okay, so I'm going to have to alter both of those pictures. So I'm going to open up GIMP. So GIMP is a open source software very similar to Photoshop, except for you don't have to pay for it. And with Adobe Cloud being as expensive as it is, I haven't looked at it in a while. Last time it was $55, so probably more expensive now. Very expensive for what it is. And I am just going to go find those images. So downloads, intro, HTML, intro, start, pictures. So I need both of these. Okay, so I'm going to have to crop this, and then I'm also going to have to make it a little smaller. So let's go ahead and crop it. Okay, there's that. Going to have to do something similar over here. Good enough. Next thing I need to do is to make sure that this isn't incredibly large. So let's go to canvas size. Okay, yeah, that's quite a bit bigger than what we're looking for. All right, so let's go ahead and scale. Make sure that this is locked over here if you're following along. And I'm going to scale this down to 350. Sad. Okay, I'm going to have to do the same thing with canvas size. I'm going to lock this. Okay, 350. All right, going to make sure this is centered. Yay. Okay, back to this. Canvas, lock, 350. Okay, scale layer, lock, 350. Okay, there's that. Now we can take both of these, and I'm just going to save them manually. I do have batch processing on here, but most of you probably don't because it's a plugin. So I'm going to come over here, save as. Oh, wrong thing. I want export as. Export as. Okay, and instead of JPEG, I'm going to do WebP. Now, this is a newer codec, but it's much, much more efficient for what we're trying to do. I'm going to bump this down to 30. There is no alpha channel. Alpha channel is your transparency layer. There is no alpha here. Okay, export as WebP. Okay, good. Now I'm going to minimize that, and then I'm going to come back over here. I'm also going to save to show you how far you've gotten. Okay, so we have our little nesting going on here, which is fine. We're doing good. The next thing that we need is a image tag. Source. Okay, pictures. And again, earlier in the course, we talked about file pathing. This is file pathing. Now, Visual Code is going to try to help you. This is not perfect. especially when you get into the server life. You still need to understand how that is working. But from here, this dot slash, oh, let's open this up a little bit. This dot slash means from this current directory, we're looking for the pictures folder, which is right here. And then we're looking for Madone, which is right here. We have two of them, but we're looking for the webp variety, the extension of webp. So it's this one. Okay. And as my cursor is hovering over this, it's showing me the absolute path to this file, which starts at the C drive, user, both here, downloads, intro to web resources, topic 1, HTML, example 1, intro, start, pictures, madone.webp. So don't do this. So how I have this here on the screen is what's called relative pathing. If you use absolute pathing, it will work until you move the file or until you move anything, because then it's suddenly not there anymore. Everything should be relative pathing for your web project. So when you move your project from a different server, from a different folder, from a different file, because if any one of those things that I just rattled off for the absolute pathing is wrong, that's not going to work. So you want to limit how many things can break getting to the resource that you're looking for. So relative pathing is a very good solution to that problem. So from current directory, pictures, find the picture you're actually looking for. And let's go ahead and close off this image tag, and voila, we have a picture. Now that looks like garbage. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to export again. Export as, replace, etc. I'm going to turn up the image quality. So when you have more pixels to work with, webp works a lot better. It should go up to 100. Let's keep it original quality. Once you have enough pixels, you can really crank down the quality on webp just because of how the compression works, which is really helpful for image-based websites because they can still look good and not take up a ton of data. Our more advanced web courses will go into why that would be a problem, why we can't just send 3 megabyte files down the pipe, especially if you have a bunch of them. Okay, so that definitely looks a little bit better. We have a little bit more contrast in here on the bike. The clouds are clear. We're doing better. We're doing better on that. Okay, so there is that. Now we have our little Madone container. Now I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to show a keyboard shortcut. So it's going to be Alt Shift and then the down arrow, and this is going to copy that content. So instead of Madone container, now we want Emona. Here we go. There we go. And then same thing down here. And we have that other photo now as well with the different type of bike. Okay. Now, one of the things I haven't done up to this point is demonstrate the difference between a block tag and a inline tag. So what I will do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to do 2 spans. Nope. Content 1. Content 1 and 2. And now I'm going to scroll down, and right here is content 1 and 2. So these are both inline. This is an inline block or inline style. Inline tag, more appropriately. Okay, this, because it's wrapped in a div, is a block. Same thing with H3, same thing with the image. Now, this can be helpful. Generally speaking, with the technologies and layout paradigms that we have currently, we don't do this a lot. but it can be helpful. The other thing that I wanted to go over before we headed on to the CSS portion of this is actually, we'll leave that. Is I want to open this up. So F12 opens up developer panel on your browser. So I'm using Firefox, so it's going to be a little bit different for you. If you're using Chrome, it's very, very similar. If you're using Edge, it is Chromium now, so it's about the same. So I wanted to come through here and show you guys that this is actually showing up inside of your inspector tool. So right here's that Doctype HTML, right here's that root tag for HTML, and notice that head tag is hidden. This is a functionality that you didn't have to do, that the browser does for you. I'm going to open this up. Meta, these are the two things that we added. Okay, body. Notice that we didn't have any of these attributes on the body, right? The browser did that for you. H1, header 1, Trek bikes. Happens to highlight over here when I hover over it on the inspector tool. Same thing with div. Okay, so this is showing you that the entire container is in blue. All right. And since we have that problem right here already that's showing up, oh, not anymore. I moved it over. Yeah. So notice when I drag this over the image is not changing. But if I do that over the text stacks on top of each other. Okay, so we'll get into more why this is in the CSS, but I really wanted to point that out. As a web developer, you need to be aware of these little details because they will cause you a lot of problems if you don't notice them right offhand. Okay, so I think that's where we're going to stop on this one. I covered the basics of HTML. Here's a handful of HTML tags that you're going to end up using. These are the ones you're going to end up using by far and away the most, by a long shot. Okay, so you're going to be using header tags a lot. You're going to be using divs almost always, spans occasionally, images almost always. This is it. Now, there are other tags out there, but the way that the web industry is going, it's mostly do this, get the structure up and running, and then let JavaScript handle all the extra stuff, and CSS for that matter. We don't do a ton of things like a side anymore because JavaScript is better at it. And then we always want more functionality as well. So overall, we're heading in the right direction for what the industry is asking for. Just we're moving away from some of these legacy solutions. And until you run into them, I wouldn't worry about it too much. And you might not run into it at all by the time you actually get out into the field. So all depends on where you land. With that said, I'm good here. This is the direction that we're going to end up heading in. We're going to be talking about CSS next. And then with the CSS demonstration, we'll pick up from here. And yeah, we'll just move on. So I'll see you in the CSX lecture.